A Confession by Leo Tolstoy is a very quite an impactful work that I read probably about my early 20s, I think. I was kind of just getting into Tolstoy and stuff, and I was like, but I was also a little bit too um, intimidated by War and Peace, like the kind of the thickness of it. And I'm still working my way through it, actually. I read the first volume, I think, but I've yet to read the second volume because I keep forgetting, but that I have it on my shelf. But it keeps getting buried by other books up there, and Anna Karenina I also read too. But I'm also kind of a little bit wary of doing a review of it because I'm not sure. I'll have to do more research and stuff on it, but we'll see how that works out. But yeah, A Confession by Leo Tolstoy is 1882, but he wrote it more so in his early 50s, and he's really struggling with his faith at this, or not at this point, but I think this is like pretty recently he kind of went into this kind of Christianity of kind of in a practical kind of almost, I think it's called anarcho Christianity in the Tolstoyan kind of way of beliefs that isn't really set on just like super metaphysical stuff of like like you have to necessarily believe the very very like exact yes or no like fully, but it's more of a this is how belief is lived out and like the gospel of the truth is lived out. And I think he wrote another book which I have on my wish list. It's called The Kingdom of God is Within You. So it's like a very kind of obviously it's a Jesus gospel kind of parable of like the kingdom of God being within you. It's like it's the potentiality is in everybody for this kind of stuff, but he didn't always feel that way. And Tolstoy talks about like his early life and how he was born into an aristocracy kind of, and he was a count, really. Count Tolstoy is his name, Lev Nikolaevich, Tolstoy. And the character of I believe Lepinovich, I can't remember his names, is in War and Peace is also based off of him, and he also ends up kind of doubting his faith as well, and is like has a kind of spiritual crisis in midlife, just like he did. And but this also kind of speaks to the not only the Russian spirit of the time of like the peasants and the class system that was pretty harsh, in Tsarist Russia. And this was probably right. This was like well before the Bolsheviks, so this is probably right when Dostoevsky died, right when he published Brothers Karamazov and his masterwork, and was kind of warning people of kind of the rise of very zealous kind of jingoist type of socialists that were more like not necessarily the kind of Petrohosky circle type variety that he was in, of the intellectual kind of mindset of it, that were more intelligentsia, I guess, but were more of the activist, like of actual nihilistic kind of thing. And I guess that is a kind of weird thing. It's like how do you battle nihilism and socialism? These two seemingly contradictory things. And I think like the philosopher Philip Mainlander did that too. And he was greatly influenced by Schopenhauer, which actually ties it in to Tolstoy, because he was also influenced by Arthur Schopenhauer and he, in the sense that he trying to look, he had trouble trying to find the meaning within things, and like with the kind of philosophical pessimism, and that everything was like subject to the will to life, and that all of this was merely everything was just striving and lust, and everything just had no meaning to it whatsoever. So but then he kind of came out of that. So basically, he talks about being born into this wealthy family and having, getting into like launching a literary career at a young age. His first book, I believe, was called Childhood, and then I think there was another add-on to that. He did, I think, in his 20s. I think he wrote a book that was called Childhood, Boyhood, Youth, I think, and I think it details just his upbringing and his uh. But he was mostly writing. I think he admitted that he was writing for the purely for the aspect of kind of fame and kind of revelry, and he was looking to kind of cement his name within the annals of Russian literature, and like who didn't want to be like Gogol and Pushkin and I think was again Viveras and Belinsky and all these great Russian writers and poets that were all like Turgenev or Goncharov, all these people Chekhov later on, but yeah, they all, it was kind of hard not to be kind of seduced by that. And I think every writer has that kind of secret dream within them to be kind of seen as great, or to, even if their works aren't seen in the lifetime, or, like to at least be seen as competent and intelligent and, insightful, perspicacious, and all that. So, but yeah, he's talking about this. He talks about not really being up until, like, he had like kind of a vague belief in God, but he didn't really commit to it. Like, he had this idea of like Jesus and, hell, like these kinds of concepts kind of existed somewhere, but he wasn't really tied to it in a very meaningful manner. So basically what he did is, even though he was, like seeking, just trying to ignore these greater uh like existential issues of just like, spirituality and faith, he also tried to, he did have, like kind of a moral uprightness to him. Like, he was raised in a kind of, Orthodox Christian, I believe, family and household. So he was kind of born into this kind of thing where he had a natural kind of way of having a moral superiority to people. And like, like he would always, often, like it was almost like a reflexive thing that he had, that he couldn't help but kind of uh, manifest with other people. And like this kind of, not snobbiness, or not really like conceitedness, I don't think, but it was definitely kind of, he was kind of an active in, different things. And like, he was still, even as a young man, he was active, and he, with helping out those who were like less, fortunate than him, and like, not just in his kind of, but this kind of also reminds me of the classic Buddha kind of story of Siddhartha Gautama too, with when Tolstoy left his kind of upbringing and, went out into like kind of like this peasant communes and lived among them, and this kind of very rustic, kind of rural, very simplistic type of life, where just living among them, like he said, like he'd rather hear the songs and the hymns of the peasants than their genuine, even if they're kind of their problems, or they had a lot of, even if it was like kind of a little bit too much, like a little too melancholy at times, he would rather be among them than among like the super snobby, intellectual but miserable people that had no, like they just, all they did is pursue wealth and fame, and just kind of material goods. And there's like that's why it's like, so it's similar to the Buddha, because I think it is like kind of that, like that kind of archetypal thing of being called out, of your unconscious kind of Platonic cave, really. Just being into kind of this ontological suffering, and being aware of that, and then being overwhelmed by that, but all, trying to escape from kind of the gripes and the grips of, Epicureanism, and going and trying to live a meaningful life that doesn't have, ulterior motives, like this literary career that he was going out. So, but he talks about this old Eastern myth about like a dragon that's stuck in a well, and then that a man chased a beast down there, but at the bottom there is a dragon. And basically, the man is like trying to grabbing to this branch, and is that's getting chewed on by these mice, and is one of them is this, I think the mice is like black, which represents like night and darkness, and then the other one is like the white one, which is like about the marching of time. And basically the man on the branch is able to, you know, able to kind of relish himself on like a little bit of like honey, little droplets of it. And basically this represents Tolstoy's fixation on family, and like, he had a pretty darn big family too, at the, especially later on in life, he was more open to having more kids. And but yeah, he had but yeah, because he finds death, the idea of death, so just unstoppable, insoluble, it's completely inescapable. He can't find the honey that's sweetened anymore. So that's like kind of it's a bittersweet kind of thing, where it's like there's this idea of like being able to um like there's certain things we can try to find in life, like that are or that are commendable and like good, and like we can kind of like lose ourselves in certain things. And I've dealt with this. I think most of us too, dealt with this of like just like can't we that the stench of death, or that kind of residual clinging of just death, the idea that one day we will die just is there, like constantly dwelling in the background, in the forefront of everything. It informs everything. Like it is like there will be a time when we are no longer are at all. Like we will end, our lives will end. And because of that, he basically Tolstoy goes on to describe four different possible solutions toward this predicament. And the first one is willful ignorance, or well, maybe not willful, but maybe it's harder for people to just like maybe me, or other people, or maybe more people than you think, to just kind of force it away, force it on the rug. Because like no matter what, if I try forcing it on the rug, it always comes back, and it's like exactly the same thing with the death of Ivan Ilyich with Tolstoy as well, that he wrote around the same time, I believe, not too long after this. He was still wrestling with the concept of death, and Ivan Ilyich was, he was like, it's just a falling sickness. It's I just or not falling sickness, but he fell off of something and then hit his head, and it was very precarious and very accidental, and just enough. It's like something. It's like absurd in a sense, because it's like, and it's existential, but it's also, it's just enough that it's like something that could happen to any of us any day. Like we could fall off a off off a bridge one day just accidentally, and it's just like it's everything's in the realm of possibility. So basically, he's talking about we can just choose to be oblivious to this fact that life is ending, and that but for him, it's like the problem is that he already does know, and that fact of knowing is like it's too much for him to bear. So like, because like once you become conscious of it, there's no kind of repressing it. It's always going to kind of fall back in, like like in a psychological sense of like a Jung and Freud talk about this kind of stuff too, with like the death drive, or it's always just going to kind of tease out later. So the second solution would be Epicureanism. So also known, maybe hedonism is maybe a synonym to that. But it's like you're being aware that life is ending, and you can basically enjoy it. Just enjoy what you have while you have it. Don't really think too much about it. Don't really overthink about it. And this also sounds like something Thomas Nagel too. I think he had something called the Mayfly, I think. And it's like sounds like a lot similar, because like he talked about something about ignorance, and like just enjoying your life while and living for the moment, and basically is like I think also that it's also a little bit what Albert Camus talked about in the Myth of Sisyphus too. Like he talks about there being solutions, and like one of them being the attitude of suicide being like one where it's like every day, it's like, why not commit suicide? He's like posing the question, obviously, like he's not vying for it, he's not opting for it, but he's like saying like existentially the odds are like that our life is going to be suffering and it's meaningless, so why not commit suicide? Why not just end it? And it's like it's not meant to be morbid for the sake of morbid. I mean, I've read Emil Chorin. He seems to kind of dwell, or Chorian, or I think Romanian philosopher and aphorist and writer guy, poet. And he talked a lot about just kind of, he seemed to dwell in it and a little bit basking in that kind of the aspect of misery and mordant kind of pessimism. But I think Tolstoy has, like he's going beyond this kind of, an epic arena. Like he's like talking about how it might be operable for a little bit, but it only for those who can actually afford it. So if you think about, well, yeah, sure, but for the most part, if you're like scraping and like basically desperate for money all the time, it's not really gonna work out in the long term. Like you can kind of waste your stuff on money, and you can try to live. I've seen people live weirdly Epicurean kind of alcoholic lives while being homeless, or like kind of crashing at people's paths, and like it still kind of seems like they're just like there's something empty to it. So despite in their what they might claim. So yeah, he basically talks like from a moral standpoint that this is also not commendable because um, it's just not like a accessible kind of lifestyle. So anyway, so the next one is the intellectually for a variety of trying to assess the situation by saying that if God doesn't exist, why wait? So it's like why why keep kind of like playing this game of like with carrying on and acting like anything is, and then just like saying like, well, yeah, just why not just get it over with ending oneself or ending one's life. And he's saying like the problem with that is like that he admits that he's too cowardly because he's like this, even though this is the most logically consistent version of the responses. um, and then the final one is that Tolstoy says is that there's is by just holding on and living it through the absurdity of everything while not fully knowing everything, but just like clinging on to this idea of God, this vestige in this thing, knowing that it seems everything does seem utterly hopeless, but at the same time, at least with God in this thing, and even though it sounds kind of maybe pithy or like maybe cute or maybe evasive, and it's just like, oh, it's just God, it's like it's not uh, it's not like pragmatic enough. It's not material. It's not like it's not anything. If I can't see God, if I can't see Him working in my life, if I can't see Him like working miracles, then why should I bother? Like some people might say, or I might have said at some point. But I'm still struggling with that, to be honest. But like with the thing with this idea of God being like this ultimate out, complete Platonic truth that's beyond, if it just veils of time. It's beyond, you know, I think of God in a sense of like God is like a change, like a constant kind of fluctuation, and like in the universe, and like, um, but and then he turns to the question of God's existence naturally. So Tolstoy starts talking about how he's after kind of fearing about his um attempts to find out the answers for everything. He's like he turns to different things like the cosmological argument by the was that Anselm, I think. The Anselm did that. One of the cosmological ones. I think there's one by Aquinas as well. But he basically says that God must exist based on the need to ascribe an original cause. So there's like a first cause to the universe. So, but Tolstoy doesn't really buy into it all that much. He's like kind of like, I don't really think God can be. And I agree with him on this too. Like it's like you can't really just like sit there and kind of argue and be like, well, in the best of all possible worlds and realities and this and that, God exists because he's like the first cause, and like if the most perfect thing exists, the most perfect version of this exists, like a unicorn exists or whatever, like William Lane Craig said, if that exists, then in the mind, then so it exists in reality. So it's like you're kind of manifesting this thing, which is kind of too. It's bending it. It's like grasping at straws to be able to prove something. And Tolstoy turns to more of a intuitive based kind of mystical um, uh, basis for God's like existence, and it's more on. He has said that God is life, like God is the essence of everything. Like he's evident in everything. So, and that he adds this flavor to life, and that in Kierkegaard said like God makes man greater than they are. Like he makes man like beautifies them and makes them something like he you know like transfixes and basically transfigures them into something more meaningful and adds flavor to their life piquancy. So there's this kind of thing with like like that's why I lived among the peasant communes and like all that, is because there was like a great kind of need to kind of give up all this kind of these like the safety net of security that he could have lived with, again just like the Buddha. He could have been the Siddhartha could have been a prince, wealthy and not known about any of this, but he did. Like as Dostoevsky said, I'd rather live in a fool's paradise than I'd rather live in a sad reality, I think, in a sad hell than a fool's paradise, I think was the quote. But anyway, so yeah, like basically he adds meaning to this, and the suffering adds meaning to this too. Like that aspect of like full on just like dying, diving in with that. Like yes, like I will accept the suffering. Like it will, it has configured me into like something different because of it. Like I've learned from it and gleaned something. So that is Tolstoy's A Confession. Definitely recommend. It's a little bit something different. It's more it's kind of autobiographical in essay form. But yeah, I am also slowly working through, because I really like it. Because I really like it, I don't want to rush through it. Italo Calvino's, if, wait, Traveler, if on a winter's light, a traveler. It's a really interesting kind of, very unique kind of narrative style of framing, and how he talks about kind of underselling his book in a sense of like saying like, oh, this is like going to be just like every other book, and like you have to tell that, tell your, if you're tell your reader or tell your family to turn up the TV off because you've got the new Italo Calvino book and you have to read it. It's like it's like you need to focus on it first, and I thought that was funny. So I'm slowly working my way through that, and I also intend on doing The Flowers of Buffoonery by Osmo Dazé, a kind of slightly more kind of funnier, kind of almost like a slight screwball aspect of a little bit more, but it was also leavened out. Obviously, definitely had a lot of very, very depressing stuff in it too, about suicide pacts and stuff like that. The whole story revolves around that. So get to reviewing those too soon. So thanks for watching.